Chapter 1: The Woman and the Watchdog. Rhonda Green never rushed. It wasn't that she couldn't. She simply had no interest in doing so, especially when rushing usually meant missing something important. And she had spent most of her life proving that missing something was rarely acceptable. Carl, walking precisely at her right side, matched her pace with disciplined ease, his sleek black and tan frame moving as if tethered to her by something stronger than a leash. Which, in truth, he was. "Morning, Rhonda," called Jenna from the front desk. Rhonda turned slightly so her left ear faced the sound. "Morning," she returned, smiling. Carl's head flicked briefly toward Jenna before returning to its usual position, vigilant and forward. "You've got 2 early sessions," Jenna added, tapping her schedule. "And Mr. Donnelly called. He says he's bringing donuts." That got a reaction. Rhonda's grin widened. "Then I fully support his rehabilitation progress." Jenna laughed. "I figured you might." Carl glanced up at her as if aware of the shift in mood. His tail gave a single measured wag. Not exuberant, just enough to acknowledge that something pleasant had been detected. Inside the therapy room, Rhonda moved smoothly into her routine, guiding her young patient through gentle stretches. Carl settled nearby, alert but relaxed enough that his presence didn't intimidate the child. "What if I fall?" the boy asked, wobbling uncertainly. "You won't," Rhonda said calmly. "But if you do, I'll catch you." "And if you don't?" he pressed, clearly testing her. Carl lifted his head. Rhonda smiled. "Then Carl will." That seemed to satisfy him. The session ended with visible progress, and a jelly-filled donut carefully split in half, because fairness mattered when a service dog was involved. By mid-morning, Rhonda felt that satisfying rhythm settle in. Purposeful work, steady energy, and Carl's constant presence anchoring her awareness. This was her life, carefully built and comfortably lived, which was why the collision came as such a surprise. She turned the corner with a clipboard in hand just as someone else stepped into the hallway from the opposite direction. It happened quickly, too quickly for her to adjust. But Carl adjusted. With precise speed, he shifted his body between Rhonda and the oncoming figure, halting just short of contact. His posture changed instantly, no longer relaxed observer, but active barrier. "Oh, whoa!" The man stumbled back a step, hands raised instinctively. Not in surrender, exactly, but certainly in caution. Rhonda stopped, blinking. "I'm so sorry. I didn't..." She shifted slightly, angling her head to hear better. The man was saying something, but it reached her as a blur of muffled syllables. "Fine. Just didn't expect. Dog. I'm sorry, could you say that again?" she asked, polite but direct. He lowered his hands slowly, studying both her and Carl with careful attention. "I said I'm fine. I just didn't expect to meet security quite so personally." Rhonda's lips twitched. "He prefers essential personnel." Carl did not react, remaining perfectly still, eyes focused. "I'm Daniel Mercer," the man added, "facilities consultant. I'm here about the renovation project." "Rhonda Green," she replied, "physical therapist. And this is Carl." A beat passed. Daniel looked at Carl. Carl looked at Daniel. It was not a welcoming silence. "Well," Daniel said finally, "Carl seems thorough. That's one word for it. Does he always do that?" "Only when he decides it's necessary." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "And right now?" Rhonda exhaled lightly. "Right now, he doesn't know you. That feels like a disadvantage." "It usually is." Despite herself, she found it difficult not to smile. There was something refreshingly calm about his response. No bluster, no bravado, just quiet observation. Carl, however, remained unconvinced. "You can move now," Rhonda told him gently, touching his shoulder. "It's okay." Carl hesitated, then shifted back into position at her side, though his attention did not waver. "Permission granted," Daniel murmured. "I wouldn't get used to it," Rhonda replied. They stood there another moment, the awkwardness stretching just long enough to become mildly uncomfortable. "So," Daniel said, glancing down the hallway, "I assume you'll be one of the people most affected by the renovations." "I assume so too. I'll try not to disrupt your workflow too much." "That would make you very popular." He smiled slightly. "I've always aimed for moderate popularity. It feels more sustainable." This time, Rhonda did laugh. Carl's ears flicked at the sound, though he did not relax. "Well," she said, adjusting her clipboard, "I have a session in 3 minutes, so..." "Of course," Daniel said, stepping back. "I'll let you get to it." Rhonda nodded, then paused. "One piece of advice? I'm listening. Until Carl decides you're safe, don't approach me from the right side." Daniel considered that. Duly noted. She started to walk past him, Carl in perfect sync beside her. As they moved down the hallway, she could feel Daniel's gaze lingering. Not uncomfortable, just curious. She was used to that. What she wasn't used to was noticing it. "Interesting," Daniel murmured to himself once she was out of earshot. Carl, however, heard him just fine. He glanced back once, memorizing. Later that evening, Rhonda leaned back on her couch. Carl sprawled across the floor with the dignified air of a dog finally off duty. Her phone buzzed. "Dad, stopped by earlier. You weren't home." Everything okay? She smiled, typing quickly. Rhonda, everything's fine. Was that work? Nothing broken, I promise. A pause. Dad, yet. She laughed out loud. Carl's head lifted. What? She said. He's not wrong. Carl huffed softly and lowered his head again. Rhonda stared at the message thread for a moment, then set the phone aside. Her day had been ordinary, except it hadn't. Because now, somewhere in the back of her mind, there was a man who hadn't flinched away from Carl. Not really, and hadn't tried to challenge him either. A man who had simply stayed. Carl shifted slightly, eyes half opening. Yes, Rhonda said quietly. I noticed too. Carl didn't respond, but he didn't dismiss it either. Chapter 2: A complicated introduction. By Wednesday morning, the clinic no longer felt entirely like Rhonda's domain. It wasn't anything obvious. No rearranged equipment, no construction crews tearing into walls. But there was a subtle shift in the air, the kind that came when someone new had begun moving through a space with purpose. Carl noticed it before she did. She could tell by the set of his shoulders as they entered the building, the slight tightening in his gait as he took his usual position at her right side. His attention wasn't scattered, exactly, but it was sharper, more deliberate. Cataloging something. New smells, Rhonda murmured, glancing down at him as she shrugged out of her jacket. Carl flicked an ear but kept moving. At the front desk, Jenna leaned closer as Rhonda approached. He's back. Rhonda angled her head. Who? Daniel, Jenna said, dropping her voice just enough to sound theatrical. Facilities consultant. Early 30s, annoyingly calm. Clearly here to disrupt our lives. Rhonda smiled faintly. You seem to have formed a strong opinion. He asked questions about airflow, Jenna said, scandalized. Airflow, Rhonda. Unforgivable. He's in exam room 3 with Dr. Patel, Jenna added. And he brought blueprints. That explained it. Carl's attention shifted down the hallway as if confirming the information. Well, Rhonda said, tapping her clipboard against the counter. Let's survive one session at a time. She made it through her first appointment without incident, guiding an elderly patient through balance exercises while Carl maintained his quiet watch. Still, she found herself just slightly distracted. Not enough to interfere, but enough to notice. By the time she stepped into the hallway again, it felt inevitable. Sure enough, Daniel emerged from one of the treatment rooms at the exact same moment. This time, he didn't step too close. Carl still moved forward. Not aggressively, but unmistakably. Morning, Daniel said, stopping at what seemed like a carefully calculated distance. His eyes flicked briefly to Carl, then back to Rhonda. I've been properly briefed about your right side. Good, Rhonda replied. It reduces surprises. I'm a fan of reduced surprises. There was a brief pause while Carl decided how much tension to maintain. He settled on noticeable. Daniel nodded, as if acknowledging an unspoken negotiation. I was hoping to speak with you, actually, about how the plan changes might affect your workspace. Rhonda shifted her weight slightly, angling her left ear toward him. You'll want to speak a little louder, she said, or just stay on this side. Like this? He asked, stepping a fraction to his left. Carl adjusted instantly, keeping himself between them. Almost, Rhonda said, amused. He'll keep doing that. I had a feeling. Rather than push closer, Daniel remained where he was. Would it help if we sat down somewhere quieter? That caught her off guard. Most people tried to compensate by repeating themselves louder or faster, often making things worse. He had simply changed the environment. It might, she admitted. The small consultation room near the back was empty, and, more importantly, quiet. Rhonda took a seat at the table, positioning herself so her left ear faced him. Carl lay down beside her chair, his body angled outward, eyes never leaving Daniel. Daniel set a folder on the table but didn't open it yet. Before we start, he said, I want to make sure I'm communicating clearly. If I say something that doesn't come through, just tell me. I will. And if I forget which side to stand on, you'll know, she said, glancing briefly at Carl. A hint of a smile touched his mouth. Fair enough. He opened the folder then, spreading out a set of drawings. These are preliminary layouts. Nothing's final. I want input before anything becomes less flexible. Rhonda leaned forward slightly, studying the page. What you'll notice, Daniel continued, is that the therapy area would expand, but it shifts the equipment storage to the opposite wall. She frowned faintly. That's further from where we typically work. Right, he said. And that's why I wanted to ask. How often do you need immediate access during a session? Frequently, she said without hesitation. If a patient loses balance, I can't leave them to retrieve something. Daniel nodded, making a quick note. Okay, so proximity's non-negotiable. Carl's ears twitched at the scratch of the pen. Rhonda studied him for a moment. You're actually listening. I find it improves outcomes. That's surprisingly rare. I've heard. The corner of her mouth lifted again. They worked through several more points, the conversation settling into an easy rhythm. Daniel asked precise questions, never assuming, never interrupting. When she paused to clarify something, he waited rather than filling the space. And gradually, almost without realizing it, Rhonda relaxed. Carl, however, did not. At one point, Daniel reached across the table to adjust the blueprint, his hand moving slightly closer to Rhonda's side than before. That was enough. Carl rose silently in a single fluid motion. Daniel froze mid-reach. Rhonda didn't even look up. Too close. Understood, Daniel said, withdrawing his hand immediately. I'll respect the perimeter. Carl remained standing for a second longer, then settled back down. That was a test, Daniel said after a pause. No, Rhonda said. That was a warning. He considered that. What's the difference? If it had been a test, she said, finally meeting his eyes, you'd have failed already. There was a beat of silence. Then Daniel laughed. Quiet, genuine, and completely unoffended. I stand corrected. Something about that eased the last bit of tension in the room. They continued for another 20 minutes, refining details, adjusting ideas. By the time Daniel closed his folder, the sense of unfamiliarity had faded, replaced by something more curious. Well, he said, standing carefully, keeping his distance. This was extremely helpful. Thank you. You're welcome. I'll revise these and come back with something more practical. Rhonda nodded. We'll see what Carl thinks. Daniel glanced down. I had a feeling he was the final decision maker. He has strong opinions. I respect that. Carl watched him closely, as if evaluating the sincerity of that statement. Daniel didn't try to approach him. He didn't extend a hand or make any sudden movement. He simply inclined his head slightly, as if acknowledging Carl as something more than just a dog, and stepped back. I'll see you later, Rhonda. Later, she said. He left the room without incident. The door clicked shut. Rhonda exhaled slowly, leaning back in her chair. Well, she murmured. Carl looked up at her. That could have gone worse. Carl blinked once. She tilted her head, studying him. You didn't hate him. Carl did not respond. But he hadn't barked. He hadn't escalated. And for Carl, that counted. Rhonda tapped her fingers lightly against the table. Interesting. Carl lowered his head back to the floor, but his ears remained alert, as if the situation was not resolved, just ongoing. Down the hall, Daniel paused by a window, letting out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. That went well, he muttered. A passing staff member raised an eyebrow. Talking to yourself already? Just thinking out loud. Careful, she said. That's how it starts. He smiled faintly and glanced back down the hallway. Somewhere behind that door was a woman who clearly knew exactly who she was, and a dog who intended to make sure no one else forgot it. Daniel adjusted his grip on the folder. Challenge accepted, he said quietly. And for the first time in a long while, he meant it in the best way possible. Chapter 3, The Dog Test. By Friday, Carl had formed an opinion. Rhonda didn't need a verbal confirmation. Carl had never offered one in 10 years. But she understood him well enough to read the conclusions in the smallest shifts. The way his attention lingered, the way he measured distance, the precise level of tension he chose to hold. Daniel Mercer had not been dismissed, which, in Carl's world, was the closest thing to a provisional approval. Don't let it go to your head, Rhonda muttered as she clipped on Carl's leash before heading into work. You're still under review. Carl flicked his tail once, unimpressed. The clinic was already buzzing when they arrived. A group session had just wrapped up, leaving a trail of chatter and half-laughter in the air. Rhonda navigated through it easily, her awareness always slightly angled toward sound, always compensating just enough. Carl stayed close, guiding without being obvious. Morning, Jenna called as they passed. Rhonda turned, catching it clearly this time. Morning. He's here again, Jenna added, lowering her voice with exaggerated suspense. Blueprint Man. Rhonda shook her head with a faint smile. He has a name. I remember. I just like mine better. Carl's ears tilted toward the hallway as if confirming. Of course you do, Rhonda said. She had just stepped into the therapy area when she saw him. Daniel stood near the far wall, sleeves rolled to his forearms, studying the space with quiet concentration. There was a tablet in his hand this time instead of a folder, and he was speaking with Dr. Patel, though his voice didn't carry clearly across the room. Carl slowed. Not stopped. Not blocked. Just slowed. That's progress, Rhonda murmured under her breath. Carl didn't respond, but he didn't accelerate either. Daniel noticed them almost immediately. His expression shifted. Not surprised anymore, not cautious, but something more settled. Familiar in an early, tentative way. He excused himself from Dr. Patel with a brief nod and approached. Not directly, and certainly not from the right side. He circled slightly, maintaining what had become an unspoken perimeter. Good morning, he said. Morning, Rhonda replied. Carl watched every step. I made some adjustments based on what you said, Daniel continued, lifting the tablet slightly. Thought you might want to look before I finalize anything. Rhonda glanced around the room. Now? Or later, he said easily. I'm not in a rush. That, more than anything else, seemed to matter. Now is fine, she said. I've got a few minutes. They moved toward an open space near the parallel bars. Rhonda positioned herself again so her left ear faced him. Daniel noticed without comment, adjusting his stance accordingly. Carl remained standing this time. That was new. Daniel seemed to recognize it too. Am I being evaluated more intensely today? He asked. Yes, Rhonda said simply. Good, he replied. I prefer clear expectations. She almost laughed. He held out the tablet. Not too close, not crossing the invisible line, Carl enforced. Rhonda stepped forward to meet him halfway, and for a moment, Carl shifted as if to intervene, then didn't. The movement froze halfway before dissolving, his stance easing by a fraction. Rhonda noticed immediately. So did Daniel, though he was careful not to react. Show me, she said. He pulled up a revised layout and began explaining. I reworked the storage placement. It's closer to the primary therapy zones now, and there's a secondary access point here, so you're not reaching across the room during a session. Rhonda leaned in, studying it. That's better. I also adjusted the spacing between stations, he continued. You mentioned needing room to maneuver quickly if someone loses balance. She nodded. Yes, that's important. I assume so, he said, but I'd rather hear it than guess. Carl shifted his weight slightly, his gaze moving between them. Daniel didn't reach for anything this time. He let Rhonda guide the interaction, stepping only when she stepped, staying exactly where he needed to be, and nowhere he shouldn't. After a few minutes, Rhonda straightened. This works, she said. In fact, this is good. That's reassuring, he said. I'd like to avoid being the person everyone blames for inconvenience. You're doing better than that. I'll take it. There was a brief pause, comfortable in a way their previous conversations hadn't quite achieved yet. And then, can I ask you something? Daniel said. Rhonda's brow lifted slightly. You just did. He smiled faintly. May I ask another one? That depends. About Carl. Carl's ears flicked sharply at his name. Rhonda crossed her arms. Not defensive, just thoughtful. Go ahead. What exactly counts as passing the test? Daniel asked, glancing down at Carl. Because I get the impression I haven't failed, but I'm not exactly graduating either. Rhonda considered that, then crouched slightly beside Carl, resting her hand lightly against his shoulder. Carl isn't evaluating you the way people do, she said. He's not deciding if he likes you. That's humbling. He's deciding if you're safe, she continued. Not just in general. Safe around me, safe near me, safe to be close to me. Daniel nodded slowly. And that takes time. Yes. He studied Carl for a moment. Is there anything I should be doing differently? Rhonda's gaze shifted to him, measuring. You're already doing the most important thing. Which is, you're listening. Carl exhaled softly, settling more fully onto his pause. It was subtle, but it was there. Daniel noticed. Have I improved? He asked quietly, almost to the dog. Carl did not respond, but he didn't tense. Daniel took that as an answer. Well, he said, straightening. I'll continue not failing then. That's a good strategy. Rhonda rose, brushing her hands lightly against her pants. You seem comfortable with slow progress. I don't think this is something that works any other way, he said. She studied him for a moment, her expression shifting, less guarded than before, but not entirely open. Curious. You're not wrong, she said. A patient called out from across the room, and Rhonda turned instinctively toward the sound. I should get back to work, she added. Of course, Daniel said, stepping back immediately to give her space. Carl moved with her as she turned, still on her right side, still attentive, but without the same rigid insistence as before. As they walked away, Daniel watched them go, his expression thoughtful. Progress, he murmured. Across the room, Rhonda crouched beside her next patient, her attention already shifting with practiced ease. But in the back of her mind, something lingered. Carl hadn't stopped Daniel. Not once. Later that afternoon, as they stepped outside for a brief break, Rhonda leaned against the railing, arms folded loosely. Well? She said, glancing down at Carl. Carl sat beside her, posture relaxed but alert. You let him stand closer today. Carl blinked slowly. That's new, she continued. A pause. Then Carl shifted, just slightly, leaning against her leg. Rhonda smiled faintly. I thought so. She looked out across the parking lot, the late sunlight stretching shadows along the pavement. Daniel Mercer was patient, careful, and, perhaps most importantly, he didn't try to force his way past the boundaries she had spent years building. Carl had noticed, and whether she wanted to admit it yet or not, so had she. Chapter 4 Weekend Revelations. Saturday mornings always felt different. The pace slowed, the edges of Rhonda's routine softened, and even Carl, still vigilant, still precise, carried himself with a subtle ease that never appeared during the workweek. Relax, Rhonda told him as she pulled into her parents' driveway. You're off duty. Carl's ears flicked, but he didn't immediately leave his post. He waited, as he always did, until she stepped out first. Only then did he follow, moving close at her right side as they approached the front door. It opened before she could knock. There you are, her mother said warmly, already reaching for her. Come inside before your father decides the door hinges need reinforcement again. I heard that, her father called from somewhere deeper in the house. Rhonda grinned. Of course you did. Carl crossed the threshold beside her, and the transformation was immediate. His posture shifted. Not entirely relaxed, not careless, but unmistakably lighter. His focus broadened, no longer narrowed to a single protective point. And when her father stepped into view, Carl abandoned Rhonda. It wasn't dramatic. He didn't bolt or bark. He simply changed direction with quiet certainty and walked straight toward him. Well, look who decided I'm worth visiting, her father said, crouching slightly as Carl approached. Carl leaned into him. Rhonda folded her arms, pretending to be offended. Wow, 10 years of loyalty and I'm replaced in under 5 seconds. You're still his person, her father said, scratching behind Carl's ears. I'm just his favorite entertainment. That sounds right. Her mother laughed, already heading toward the kitchen. Lunch will be ready in 20 minutes. And yes, I made enough for Carl. Of course you did, Rhonda said. Some things never changed. Carl followed her father into the living room, where a familiar tug toy was already waiting. Within seconds, the dignified, ever-alert service dog turned into something entirely different, playful, engaged, and completely unconcerned with scanning for threats. Rhonda leaned against the doorway, watching. You spoil him, she said. Her father grinned, bracing himself as Carl pulled. He deserves it. He works harder than most people I know. That's not inaccurate. Carl tugged harder, the low rumble of playful determination in his chest unmistakable. And besides, her father added between pulls, it's good for him. Reminds him he's allowed to just be a dog sometimes. Rhonda smiled faintly. That had been the point all along. Later, as expected, Carl sat at the table with impeccable manners while her mother served him a portion alongside theirs. You'd think he'd have figured out utensils by now, her father commented. Rhonda shook her head. We've had this conversation. I maintain my expectations. Carl glanced between them, unimpressed with the ongoing critique. See, her mother said, setting down his plate. Judgment. Fair, Rhonda admitted. They ate together easily, conversation flowing the way it always had. Comfortable, familiar, threaded with quiet humor. So, her father said after a while, casually but not entirely casually, anything new at work? Rhonda hesitated just long enough to be noticeable. Carl's head lifted slightly. Yes, she said finally. There's someone new, a consultant. He's handling the renovation project. Her father's expression didn't change much. It rarely did, but she knew him well enough to recognize the subtle shift in attention. Consultant, he repeated. Facilities, she clarified. He's redesigning parts of the clinic. Rhonda took a sip of water. He's good at it. Is he? Her father said. Her mother leaned in slightly, clearly interested now. What's his name? Daniel. Carl's ears flicked once. Her father set his fork down. Does he understand Carl? That was the real question. Rhonda considered it. He's learning. Learning how? Her father pressed. He doesn't push, she said. He listens. He gives space when it's needed. Carl lowered his head again, apparently satisfied with that answer. Her father studied the dog for a moment, then nodded slowly. That's something. It is, Rhonda agreed. They moved on after that, the conversation drifting into other topics. But the mention lingered quietly in the background, unspoken but present. After lunch, Rhonda stepped outside to the backyard, the cool air brushing against her face. Carl followed, but at a distance this time, distracted by her father, who was still determined to win their ongoing tug-of-war match. You're losing, her father said. Carl growled softly. You're absolutely losing. Rhonda laughed under her breath, leaning against the fence. For a moment, everything felt balanced. Then, Rhonda, she turned. Daniel stood just beyond the open gate, holding a slim folder in one hand. He looked slightly uncertain, as if aware he might be interrupting something important. Oh, she said, surprised. Hi. Carl was not surprised. In one fluid motion, he dropped the tug toy and moved, fast, silent, controlled, placing himself at Rhonda's right side before Daniel had taken a second step. The shift was immediate, complete. Relaxed dog vanished. Watchdog returned. Her father straightened slowly behind them, his expression sharpening in a way Rhonda had seen all her life. Who's this? He asked. Daniel, Rhonda said. From work. Daniel gave a small nod. I'm sorry to drop by unannounced. I was in the area and realized I still had a set of revised plans you asked for. It seemed easier to deliver them directly. Rhonda stepped forward slightly to meet him, but Carl matched her instantly, maintaining position. It's fine, she said. I just didn't expect. Clearly? Daniel replied, glancing briefly at Carl. Yes, she said dryly. That part is obvious. Her father stepped closer, not aggressively, but with unmistakable presence. You're the consultant. Daniel shifted his attention. Yes, sir. Carl's gaze moved between them. He knows you're here? her father asked Rhonda. Yes, Dad. A beat passed. Her father nodded once. All right. It wasn't approval exactly, but it wasn't rejection either. Daniel extended the folder slightly, not crossing the invisible boundary Carl maintained. These are updated. No pressure to review them today. Rhonda hesitated, then stepped forward just enough to take them. Carl allowed it. Barely. Thank you, she said. You're welcome. Daniel lingered for half a second longer, then inclined his head slightly. I'll let you get back to your weekend. Okay. He turned to leave, moving without hurry, without tension. Carl watched every step. Only when Daniel passed back through the gate and disappeared from view did Carl's posture ease again, though not completely. Rhonda exhaled slowly. Well, that was interesting, her father said. That's one word for it. They stood there for a moment, the quiet settling back in. Carl remained close, not as rigid as before, but not entirely relaxed either. You didn't go after him, Rhonda said softly, glancing down. Carl said nothing, but he hadn't, and that mattered. Her father crossed his arms. He handled that well. Rhonda looked over. You think so? He didn't try to force anything, he said. Didn't challenge the dog. Didn't crowd you. Rhonda nodded slowly. Carl leaned lightly against her leg. I noticed, she said. That evening, as Rhonda drove home, Carl sat beside her in his usual place. Calm, watchful, steady. But different. Something had shifted. Not fully. Not yet. But enough that she couldn't ignore it. He showed up uninvited, she said aloud. Carl remained silent. And you let him leave unescorted. A pause. Then Carl shifted slightly closer. Rhonda smiled to herself. Yeah, she said. I noticed that too. Chapter 5 Missteps and Mixed Signals. Monday arrived with a rhythm Rhonda usually trusted. Routine was her advantage. It gave her clarity, structure, and a sense of control over variables that weren't always cooperative. Sound, timing, unexpected distractions. By the time she walked into the clinic, Carl steady at her right, she felt centered again after the quiet reset of the weekend. But the moment she stepped inside, something felt off. Not dramatic, not immediate, just enough to tug at her attention. Carl noticed it too. His posture sharpened slightly, not alarmed but alert in that particular way that meant he was tracking something unfinished. Morning, Jenna said, but there was an edge of distraction in her tone. Rhonda angled her head. Morning. Everything okay? Jenna hesitated just long enough to register. Yeah, just busy. Daniel's already in with Dr. Patel again. That explained part of it. Early start, Rhonda said. Very early, Jenna replied. Like suspiciously responsible early. Rhonda smiled faintly and moved on, though the small flicker of tension didn't quite fade. Her morning sessions went smoothly. Steady progress, familiar faces, tasks that required full attention. She lost herself in the work the way she always did, letting muscle memory and training carry her forward. But Daniel crossed her mind more than once. Not distracting, not intrusive, just present. The first time she saw him that day, it wasn't intentional. She had just finished adjusting a patient's brace when voices carried faintly from the hallway outside. Muffled, but close enough that she caught fragments. Think the redesign favors. Not what she said. Space constraints, not. Rhonda's brow furrowed. She straightened, turning slightly to catch more of it. But the voices overlapped, blurred, and dissolved into something unclear. The familiar frustration pricked at her patience, that irritating sense of almost understanding. Carl, however, had already oriented himself. He stared toward the doorway, body still. Rhonda stepped out into the hallway. Daniel stood a few feet away, speaking with another consultant she hadn't met before, a woman holding a stack of plans. They didn't notice Rhonda immediately, their conversation continuing in low, quick tones. She won't like that change, the woman was saying. Daniel shook his head. No, that's not what she meant. It's not about preference. Rhonda caught only pieces. Doesn't make sense if, adjust later. We'll see how she. That was enough. Her chest tightened. Not sharply, but enough to shift her posture. Carl moved slightly forward. Rhonda stepped fully into view. If I what? The conversation stopped instantly. Daniel turned. Rhonda, I didn't realize. What exactly are we waiting to see? She asked, her tone level but unmistakably firm. The other woman glanced between them, uncertain. I think there's been a misunderstanding. There usually is, Rhonda said, sharper than she intended. Carl's stance shifted. Daniel noticed immediately. Rhonda, it's not. I heard enough, she said. That wasn't entirely true. And that was the problem. Daniel's expression changed, not defensive, but focused. Then let me clarify. It sounded pretty clear, she replied. No, he said quietly. It didn't. Not from your position. That stopped her. Carl remained tense. What does that mean? She asked. It means you caught pieces of a conversation without the context, Daniel said. His voice stayed steady, but there was an undercurrent now, something firmer than before. And I'd rather you hear the full version before deciding what it implies. The hallway felt suddenly smaller. Rhonda crossed her arms. Then explain. The other consultant shifted awkwardly. I should probably… It's fine, Daniel said without looking away from Rhonda. Stay. That, for some reason, made Rhonda bristle. Carl stepped forward half a pace. Daniel didn't move closer, but he didn't retreat either. We were discussing a layout adjustment, he said. She was concerned you wouldn't like a change to the storage configuration. And you disagreed. Yes. Why? Because your feedback hasn't been about liking anything, he said. It's been about function, safety, accessibility. Rhonda hesitated. Daniel continued. I said we shouldn't assume your reaction without checking it against what you've actually said. The other consultant nodded quickly. That's true. I didn't mean anything by it. I just… Rhonda exhaled slowly. The sharp edge of irritation dulled, but didn't disappear entirely. And we'll see how she… Rhonda pressed. Daniel's gaze held hers. Finish evaluating it. After we present the revision. Pause. That was reasonable. Uncomfortably so. Carl's posture eased by a fraction, but he didn't fully relax. Rhonda looked between them, the earlier frustration settling into something quieter, less certain. I didn't hear all of that, she admitted. I know, Daniel said. There was no accusation in it. That made it worse. The other consultant shifted again. I'm going to, give you both a minute. She slipped away quickly, leaving them alone in the hallway. Silence stretched between them. Not awkward this time, but heavy with something unspoken. I wasn't talking around you, Daniel said finally, or about you in a way you weren't meant to hear. Rhonda nodded once, looking down briefly before meeting his eyes again. I know. Carl glanced between them. You reacted fast, Daniel added. I usually have to, she said. I figured. Another pause. Rhonda shifted her weight. I didn't like not understanding what was being said. That makes sense. And I filled in the gaps, she said. With the worst possibility. Maybe. Daniel tilted his head slightly. That's not unreasonable either. Rhonda let out a quiet breath, tension easing just a little more. It's not ideal. No, he agreed. But it's human. Carl finally settled back onto all fours, the immediate tension dissipating. That mattered. Rhonda glanced at him, then back at Daniel. You didn't raise your voice. Daniel blinked once. I didn't think it would help. It usually doesn't. I also didn't want to make things harder for you, he added. Clarity matters more than volume. That landed. Rhonda studied him again, more carefully this time. You weren't frustrated. I was, he said. Just not at you. Then what? At the situation, he replied. Because it's fixable. And I'd rather fix it than let it turn into something else. Carl's ears flicked. Rhonda exhaled once, slow and steady. I misread that. Yes. You could have been less calm about it. I didn't see the benefit. That earned a small, reluctant smile. That's becoming a habit. I find consistency builds trust, he said. Carl glanced up at Rhonda. She noticed. I overreacted, she said. You reacted, Daniel corrected. There's a difference. I still should have asked first. Maybe, he said. But you did ask. Eventually, Rhonda's shoulders relaxed a little more. The last of the tension drained away, leaving something quieter in its place. Understanding. Carl shifted closer to her leg, but without that rigid edge from earlier. That could have gone worse, she said. It could have, Daniel agreed. They stood there for a moment, the air finally settling back into something even. Rhonda tilted her head slightly. Next time, just tell me directly. I plan to. And maybe don't discuss changes in the hallway, she added. That's fair. A beat passed. Then, I'll send you the revised version this afternoon, Daniel said. I'll look at it, she replied. And if something doesn't make sense, I'll ask, she said. Good. Carl exhaled softly. They parted without tension this time. But as Rhonda walked away, she found herself thinking, not about the misunderstanding, but about how quickly he'd chosen to correct it, and how easily she'd chosen to believe something else instead. Behind her, Daniel watched her go, his expression thoughtful. Progress, he murmured quietly. Not perfect, but real. Later that evening, Rhonda sat on her couch. Carl stretched beside her, his presence calm and steady as always. You didn't like that, she said, absently resting her hand on his head. Carl didn't move. Neither did I, she admitted. But the discomfort had changed shape. Less defensive, more reflective. Rhonda leaned back, staring at the ceiling. He didn't walk away. Carl shifted slightly closer. No, she said softly. He didn't. Chapter 6, Trust, carefully earned. The clinic felt different again on Thursday, but this time, the shift wasn't subtle. It was focused. Rhonda noticed it as soon as she walked in. Not because anything had physically changed, but because her attention kept drifting toward a specific part of the therapy area, like something unresolved had decided to make itself known. Carl noticed too. He stayed close, as always, his presence a steady constant at her right, but there was less tension in him now, less anticipation of conflict. His attention was still sharp, but not defensive. Curious. That's new, Rhonda murmured as she checked in at the desk. Jenna leaned over the counter. What is? He hasn't glared at anyone yet. Jenna blinked. Give it time. Carl flicked an ear but didn't dignify that with a reaction. Where is he? Rhonda asked before she could stop herself. Jenna's grin deepened. Near the pediatric area. Why? Rhonda picked up her clipboard. Because one of my patients is already running late, and I have time to fill. Convenient, Jenna said. Extremely. Carl followed as Rhonda made her way toward the smaller therapy rooms. The sounds of conversation, movement, and quiet encouragement filtered through the space. But beneath it all, she picked out something else. A child's voice. Frustrated. Tired. I don't want to do it again, the child said, the words carrying enough for Rhonda to catch them clearly when she turned toward the doorway. Okay, Daniel's voice replied. Calm. Steady. No pressure. Rhonda stopped just outside the room. Carl stood with her, silent. Does that mean we're done? The child pressed. No, Daniel said. But it does mean we'll do it differently. There was a pause. Rhonda leaned slightly, just enough to see inside. A little girl, no older than 6, stood beside the parallel bars, her stance uneven, her expression stubborn. Daniel stood a few feet away, not hovering, not crowding, just waiting. How? The girl asked. Show me what's hard about it, he said. She frowned. All of it. Okay, Daniel replied. Let's start there. Rhonda felt something shift, not surprising, but unexpected. Carl remained still. The girl tried again, taking a tentative step between the bars. Her balance faltered, her frustration returning almost instantly. See? I can't do it, she said. You can't do it that way, Daniel corrected gently. That's not the same thing. She looked at him, suspicious. It isn't. Nope. He crouched slightly, lowering himself to her level, but not too close. What if we make it easier first? I don't want it to be easy, she said quickly. Daniel tilted his head. You don't. No. I want to be good at it. Rhonda felt herself smile. Fair, Daniel said. Then let's make it possible first. Good can come after. The girl hesitated, then nodded. Rhonda stepped fully into the doorway. Mind if I join? She asked. Daniel glanced up, clearly surprised but not thrown off. Not at all. Carl moved with her as she entered, automatically positioning himself nearby, but his attention didn't sharpen this time. Settled. Hi, Rhonda said softly to the little girl. I heard you're working on something important. The girl crossed her arms. I guess. That usually means it's hard, Rhonda said. It is. Good, Rhonda replied. The girl blinked. Good. Yes, Rhonda said. Because hard things are the ones that matter. Daniel watched, quiet. Carl lay down, calm but attentive. The girl glanced between them. So what do I do? Rhonda gestured toward the bars. Let's try it together. One step. Not the whole thing. Just one. Just one. The girl hesitated, then stepped forward again. This time, Rhonda stayed close. Not touching, just ready. Daniel adjusted slightly on the opposite side, mirroring her without crowding. Carl didn't move. The step landed. Not perfectly, but it held. The girl looked up, surprised. I did it. You did, Rhonda said. Daniel nodded. That's step 1. And now you get to do step 2, Rhonda added. The girl groaned, but there was a smile hiding behind it now. Rhonda straightened after a moment, stepping back. You've got this, she said. Daniel glanced at her. Thanks. You didn't need me, she replied. Maybe not, he said. But that helped. Carl rose as she stepped back, moving with her. But something had changed. He didn't reposition himself fully between them. Not immediately. Rhonda noticed. Daniel did too. They didn't mention it. The session continued for a few minutes longer, the girl improving incrementally, frustration fading into focus. By the time Rhonda stepped out of the room again, she felt something unfamiliar settle into place. Respect. Not new exactly, but clearer. Carl followed her into the hallway, his movement smooth and unhurried. You liked that, she said quietly. Carl didn't respond, but he walked just slightly closer than usual, not protective, just present. A few minutes later, Daniel stepped out, closing the door behind him. That was impressive, Rhonda said before she could stop herself. He paused, caught off guard. Which part? The part where you didn't tell her what to do, she replied. He considered that. I don't think people respond well to being told what they can't feel their way through. That's very patient of you. I've been told I overthink things. That's not always a bad trait. A small smile tugged at his mouth. Glad to hear it. Carl shifted slightly at Rhonda's side. Not tense, not guarding, just aware. You didn't step in, Daniel said, glancing down briefly. Rhonda followed his gaze. You didn't need me to. I could say the same. A pause. Then, you trust him, Daniel said. It wasn't a question. Rhonda's hand rested briefly on Carl's head. I trust him with my life. I meant with other things, Daniel clarified gently. Rhonda hesitated. That was different. Carl remained still beneath her hand. I trust his instincts, she said, even when I don't fully understand them. Daniel nodded slowly. That's a lot of responsibility for him. It is. And for you. Rhonda met his eyes. I chose it. Something in the way she said it made him pause. Not challenged. Just considered. Carl shifted again, this time stepping just a fraction out of perfect alignment. It was subtle, but unmistakable. Rhonda felt it immediately. Daniel saw it too, but didn't react. Didn't comment. Didn't move closer. He just stayed where he was. That mattered. Rhonda exhaled softly. You're good with the kids. I try to be. You don't try too hard. I've learned that doesn't help. She smiled slightly. You're learning a lot of things that don't help. I'm narrowing it down. Carl settled fully beside her, relaxed. Not off duty, but not guarded. Rhonda glanced down at him, then back at Daniel. You're getting closer, she said. To what? She tilted her head slightly, studying him. To standing on the right side. Daniel's brow lifted. That sounds like a promotion. It is. He nodded once. I'll try not to mess it up. That would be ideal. They stood there for a moment, the space between them no longer defined by tension, but by something quieter, something building. Carl didn't interrupt, didn't block, didn't correct. He simply stayed. And for the first time, that felt like permission. Later that evening, Rhonda sat on her couch. Carl stretched across the floor in his usual place. She watched him for a long moment. You let him stay, she said. Carl blinked slowly. You didn't push him back. Silence. Rhonda leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees. That's new. Carl exhaled softly. She smiled to herself. Careful, she murmured. You're setting a precedent. Carl didn't move, but he didn't disagree either. Somewhere else, Daniel sat with his tablet open, reviewing final adjustments, but not entirely focused. Because for the first time since he'd stepped into that clinic, the distance had changed. Not dramatically, not completely, but enough that he noticed, enough that it mattered. He leaned back slightly, thoughtful. Carefully, he said aloud, because whatever this was, it wasn't something you rushed. And for once, he didn't want to. Chapter 7, The Right Side Shift. It happened on a Tuesday. Not dramatically. Not with any obvious marker that would have stood out to anyone else passing through the clinic. There was no announcement, no sudden realization, no moment that demanded attention. But for Rhonda and for Carl, it was unmistakable. The day had started like any other. Early sessions, steady progress, the familiar cadence of voices and movement threading through the therapy floor. Rhonda moved through it with practiced confidence. Carl at her right, the quiet certainty of his presence grounding every step. And Daniel was there, not hovering, not intruding, just present. By now, his role in the clinic had settled into something more natural. He spoke with staff easily, checked measurements, adjusted plans on his tablet without disrupting anyone's routine. When he crossed paths with Rhonda, their conversations were no longer tentative or purely professional. There was an ease there now, still controlled, still careful, but undeniably real. Carl still watched him, but he no longer watched him as a threat. That distinction mattered more than anything. Rhonda was finishing a session with one of her regular patients when it happened. She stood beside the parallel bars, guiding the patient through a careful turn, her focus fixed entirely on the motion. Slow, she said softly. Don't rush it. I'm not rushing, the man muttered, even as he clearly tried to do exactly that. Rhonda smiled faintly. Then prove it. Carl stood nearby, his posture relaxed but attentive. Across the room, Daniel paused mid-step, watching, not interfering, not stepping in, simply observing the flow of the work as he had learned to do. The patient completed the turn, wobbled slightly, then steadied. There you go, Rhonda said. That's it. She stepped back as the patient moved forward again, giving him the space to continue without her immediate support. And that was when it happened. Without thinking, without hesitating, she turned, to speak, to reach, to orient, and Daniel was standing at her right side, not close enough to startle, not far enough to be outside her awareness, just there. Carl did not move. The realization hit all three of them at once. Rhonda froze, not out of fear, but out of pure, instinctive recognition. Carl's ears flicked. Daniel went still. For a single, suspended moment, the world narrowed to that quiet, improbable alignment. Then Carl exhaled. Not a warning, not a correction, a release. His posture remained steady, his body still angled slightly toward Rhonda, but he did not shift between them. He did not enforce space, did not redirect, did not intervene. He allowed it. Rhonda felt her breath catch, not sharply, but deeply. You're supposed to be on the other side, she said quietly, more to the moment than to Daniel. I was, Daniel replied just as softly. Then you turned. She smiled faintly, though her attention remained fixed on Carl. I did. The patient, blissfully unaware, continued his exercise. No one else in the room noticed. But for Rhonda, the shift echoed far beyond that small space. Carl stepped forward then, but not between them. He moved slightly ahead, adjusting his position as if recalibrating rather than correcting. Rhonda felt something in her chest loosen, something she hadn't realized had been held so tightly. "Well," she murmured. Daniel didn't move, didn't speak, didn't risk breaking whatever fragile balance had just been reached. "You didn't stop him," Rhonda said, glancing down at Carl. Carl did not respond, but he didn't move back into his former position either. "That's new," she added. "Yes," Daniel said quietly. She turned her head slightly, catching his expression more clearly now. There was no triumph in it, no expectation, just a quiet awareness that something important had happened. Something neither of them had tried to force. "That doesn't happen accidentally," Rhonda said. "No," Daniel agreed. Carl shifted his weight, settling more fully into his new position. A step ahead, still present, still watchful, but no longer the barrier he had once insisted on being. Rhonda looked forward again, her patient finishing the exercise with a small, satisfied nod. "Good," she said, returning her focus to him. "That's exactly what we want." But even as she continued guiding the session, a part of her remained aware of what had just changed. Not just physically, something deeper. When the session ended, she stepped away, giving her patient a moment to rest before his next round. Daniel stayed where he was. "Are you going to say something?" he asked after a moment. Rhonda huffed out a quiet breath. "I'm deciding what." "That seems fair." She folded her arms loosely, her expression thoughtful. "You didn't take advantage of it." "Of what?" "The opening," she said. "You didn't step closer. I didn't know if I should. And now." Daniel considered that carefully. "I think I should let you decide." Carl's ears tilted back briefly as if acknowledging the answer. Rhonda let out a small laugh. "That's probably the correct response. I've been learning." "You have." The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was something else now, something steadier. Carl shifted again, settling fully at Rhonda's right, just not quite as close as before. The space wasn't empty. It wasn't unguarded. But it wasn't controlled the same way. Rhonda felt it clearly. "So what does this mean?" Daniel asked. She tilted her head slightly. "It means you're no longer a potential problem." "That sounds encouraging." "It means," she continued more thoughtfully now, "that he's decided you're not going to hurt me." Daniel didn't respond right away. When he did, his voice was quieter. "That matters." "It does." They stood there for a moment longer, neither rushing to fill the space. Carl didn't interrupt, didn't correct, didn't reclaim ground that had already shifted. He simply stayed watchful, present, but at peace with the new arrangement. Rhonda glanced down at him once more. "You're making this very official." Carl blinked slowly. She looked back at Daniel. "Don't ruin it." "I don't plan to." "Good." Another beat passed. Then, "You're going to have to meet my father again," she said. Daniel's brow lifted slightly. "That sounds like a warning." "It is." Carl's tail gave the smallest flick. "And a test," Rhonda added. Daniel nodded once. "I expected that." "You should." This time, when she turned to walk away, there was no hesitation. Carl moved with her, but the space beside her right shoulder remained open. Not empty, just no longer guarded the way it had always been. And Daniel, after only the briefest pause, fell into step beside her. Carefully, respectfully, exactly where he had finally been allowed to stand. That evening, Rhonda stood by her apartment window, watching the fading light stretch across the quiet street. Carl lay nearby, his posture calm, his breathing slow and steady. "You let him in," she said softly. Carl didn't move. "You didn't just tolerate him," she added. "You chose it." A pause. Then Carl shifted slightly, resting his head against the floor with the quiet certainty of a job well done. Rhonda smiled. "Yeah," she said. "I think he earned it." Carl didn't disagree. Chapter 8 Balance. Sunday dinner at her parents' house had never felt like a test before. Rhonda stood at the front door for a moment longer than necessary, one hand resting lightly on the handle, the other holding Carl's leash. Not because she needed to, but because it grounded her. "You're very calm about this," she said quietly. Carl stood beside her, steady and composed, his posture neither tense nor relaxed, which, for him, was its own kind of answer. Rhonda exhaled once, then opened the door. Her mother greeted them exactly as she always had, warm, immediate, and entirely unconcerned with anything beyond the fact that her daughter had arrived. "There you are," she said, pulling Rhonda into a quick hug. "Come in. Dinner's almost ready." Carl stepped inside without hesitation, his attention briefly tracking the familiar space before broadening in that way it only did here. Her father appeared from the living room, wiping his hands on a rag, as if he just finished fixing something that hadn't needed fixing. "You're right on time," he said. "I try," Rhonda replied. Carl moved toward him, tail giving a small, controlled wag. "Traitor," Rhonda murmured. "You'll survive," her father said, crouching slightly as Carl approached. She smiled, but her focus shifted quickly back to the door. There was a knock. Carl turned immediately. Not defensive. Alert. Rhonda crossed the room before anyone else could move. "I've got it," she said. Her father watched her carefully. Of course he did. Rhonda opened the door. Daniel stood there. Not uncertain but not entirely at ease either. He held himself with quiet composure, dressed simply, hands free this time, no folders, no plans. Just himself. "Hi," he said. "Hi," she replied. For a moment, neither moved. Then Carl stepped forward. Not fast. Not abrupt. Just deliberate. He positioned himself at Rhonda's right side, but not between them. His gaze fixed on Daniel, assessing, measuring, confirming. Daniel didn't reach out. Didn't lean forward. Didn't speak. He simply stayed. Carl stepped closer. Another small, precise movement. Daniel remained still. Rhonda felt the moment stretch. Not uncomfortably, but with weight. Carl circled once, slow, controlled, before returning to her side. And then he sat. Rhonda blinked. Her father leaned forward slightly. "That's new." "Yes," Rhonda said softly. Daniel exhaled, just barely. "I think I passed something." "You did," she said. "Good." Carl remained seated, calm, accepting. Rhonda stepped back, opening the door wider. "Come in." Daniel nodded once and crossed the threshold. Not quickly, not casually, but with the same awareness he had shown from the very beginning. Her father stepped forward, his presence steady and unmistakable. "Daniel." "Sir," Daniel said. They shook hands, firm, brief, evaluative. "Dinner's in 10, her mother called from the kitchen. "And we have an extra plate set." "Good planning," Rhonda said. "I like him already," her mother replied. Her father shot her a brief look. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves." Carl stood and moved onward into the house, not abandoning the interaction, but no longer maintaining that tight, controlled positioning. His role had shifted again. Rhonda noticed. So did Daniel. "So," her father said, folding his arms loosely. "You understand how important she is." It wasn't a question. Daniel met his gaze. "Yes, sir. And you understand what it takes to be in her life." A beat passed. Daniel didn't rush his answer. "I'm learning." Her father watched him carefully, measuring the response. "And?" he prompted. "And I intend to keep learning," Daniel said. "At the pace she," and Carl said. Carl flicked an ear at his name. Rhonda felt something in her chest settle. Her father nodded slowly. "Good." It wasn't approval, but it was closer than before. Dinner unfolded with an ease that surprised Rhonda more than anything else. Her mother, as expected, treated Daniel like a long-lost addition to the family, asking questions, offering food, insisting he take second helpings before he'd finished the first. "So what exactly do you do again?" she asked. "I redesign spaces," Daniel said. "Make them work better for the people using them." "That sounds useful," she said. "I hope so." "He listens," Rhonda added, almost without thinking. "Even better," her mother said. Her father remained quieter, observing more than participating, but not disapproving. That mattered. And Carl. Carl lay beside the table, his posture relaxed, his attention broad rather than fixed. At one point, he even allowed his tail to thump once against Daniel's shoe. Daniel froze for half a second. Rhonda noticed immediately. "Don't react," she said under her breath. "I'm not reacting," Daniel whispered back. "You're very much reacting. I'm internalizing it." That earned a small laugh, a quiet, private moment that slipped easily between them. Carl didn't intervene. After dinner, they moved into the living room. Her father retrieved the tug toy, automatically offering it out. Carl responded instantly, his entire demeanor shifting into that playful version of himself that existed only here. Daniel watched, surprised. "That's a different dog." "Same dog," Rhonda said. "Different setting." Carl engaged fully, tugging with enthusiastic determination. "You want to try?" her father asked Daniel suddenly. Daniel hesitated. "Is that allowed?" Rhonda glanced at Carl. "Depends." Carl paused mid-tug, looking up. Then slowly he released the toy. Her father raised an eyebrow. "Well, that answers that." Daniel stepped forward carefully, taking the toy with measured confidence. He didn't pull immediately, just held it, waiting. Carl regarded him, then lunged, playfully, not aggressively, grabbing hold and pulling back with controlled strength. Daniel adjusted instinctively, finding his footing. Rhonda laughed. "Not too hard," her father warned. "He'll win." "I gathered that," Daniel replied, bracing himself. Carl tugged again, a low rumble of engagement in his chest. Not warning, not defensive, trust. Rhonda watched the exchange, something warm settling into place inside her. Her father leaned toward her slightly. "He's not trying to dominate the dog." "No," she said. "He's adapting to him." "Good," her father murmured. Carl pulled again. Daniel laughed, genuine this time, unrestrained, and adjusted his stance. He didn't win, but that wasn't the point. A little while later, as the evening wound down, Rhonda stood near the doorway again, this time not hesitating. Daniel stood beside her. On her right, Carl sat calmly at her other side, content, settled, aware, but not controlling the space between them. "Thank you for coming," she said. "Thank you for inviting me," he replied. A pause. "You survived," she added. "Barely," he said. "Your father is thorough. That's a polite way to put it." "I'm aiming for continued access," he said. She smiled faintly. "Smart." Carl shifted, leaning lightly against her leg. Rhonda glanced down, then back at Daniel. "You're part of the routine now," she said. "That sounds significant." "It is." Daniel nodded once, understanding the weight of it. "I'll take it seriously," he said. "I know." They stood there a moment longer. Not uncertain, not guarded, just steady. Rhonda opened the door. Daniel stepped out, but not away. Carl didn't move to block him, didn't pull her back, didn't enforce distance. He simply remained where he was, satisfied. Rhonda watched Daniel go, her expression thoughtful but calm, not questioning, not uncertain, balanced. When she closed the door again, Carl settled beside her. "You're okay with this?" she said softly. Carl exhaled once, quiet and certain. Rhonda smiled. "Yeah," she said. "So am I." And for the first time, the space at her right side didn't feel like something that needed guarding. It felt like something she had chosen to share, carefully, confidently, exactly as it should be.